The Rambam's words, Kol mitzvahs shebetorah, all the commandments in the Torah, bein aseh bein lo taseh, whether it's a positive commandment, whether it's a negative commandment, im over odam al achas mehem, if one had violated, transgressed any one of them, bein zodon, bein bishgogo, whether he violated it deliberately or inadvertently. Kishiyase tshuva. Again, the Rambam doesn't say you're obligated to do tshuva. If one chooses to do tshuva, the Yoshu Micheto, when he does tshuva and he extricates himself from the sin, he returns from the sin. Chayv l'svados, lifnei al kel yisborach. He must confess, make a verbal confession before God, the Blessed One. Okay? Shenemar, quotes a posuk. The verse tells us that without verbal confession, it doesn't have the value. Isho isho, kiyasu, says a man or woman who violates the Torah, they must confess their sin. Asherosu, zevidu dvorim. That's verbal confession. So based on the verse, on the posuk, you must articulate it, you must verbalize. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Now, there's a famous question which is asked. The Rambam explains that tshuva is only tshuva if you verbalize it. If you don't verbalize, it's not tshuva. So the Hilchos Chinuch, which is a commentary on the Chinuch, who's a codifier, who always usually goes in the position of Rambam, asks a question. Mar tells us Kedushin, a person is a Rasha. Not a question. He's an absolute Rasha, and he marries a woman. But the woman herself doesn't want to marry such a person with this level of spiritual connection. She says to him, I will only marry you if you're a tzaddik. But his position now is Rasha, and he says, Harei nukudeshesli, I'm marrying you on the condition, al menashani tzaddik gomer, that I'm an absolute tzaddik. He's marrying her on that condition. Meaning, if he's not a tzaddik, the marriage is not a marriage. But if he is a tzaddik, the marriage is a marriage. On the condition, I'm an absolute tzaddik. So the Gemara tells us that the marriage is questionable. Why is it questionable? Because Shema Hiru Tshuva Belibo. Because maybe when he said those words, he had stirrings of tshuva in his heart. It doesn't say because he verbalized it. Because maybe in his heart, in his mind, he had stirrings of repentance. So the Hilchos Chinuch asks, you see from the Gemara, that even if one does not verbalize his feelings and doesn't articulate what he's thinking, what he's feeling, his classification is tzaddik, which is contrary to Rambam, because Rambam says it is only tshuva based on the verse, as it says, you must have verbal confession. Without verbal confession, it seems to say it has no value. Just thinking it or feeling it. You must verbalize it. And here the Gemara says, the reason why the woman is questioned whether she's married or not, because maybe he had stirrings of tshuva in his heart. Stirrings of tshuva in his heart, that's without verbalization. So we see that tshuva without verbalization changes a person's status from Rasha to tzaddik. So how do we reconcile the Rambam with what the Talmud says? That's the question. Rambam says, when one does tshuva, meaning you have the remorse and you commit yourself not to cross that line again, you must verbalize those feelings. It's not enough to think it or to feel it. You must say, I have remorse, I regret the wrong I did, and I commit myself to the future not to cross that line again. And if you don't say that, you did not fulfill the mitzvah of tshuva. It's not tshuva. And the Gemara says if a man marries a woman on the condition that he's a tzaddik, although he's not a tzaddik, it's questionably whether she's married or not, because maybe when he gave her the ring and put the ring on her finger, in his mind, in his heart, he had stirrings of tshuva. There was no verbalization. And although there's no verbalization, and he said on the condition on a tzaddik, if he had those stirrings, he's a tzaddik. But how could he be a tzaddik? The Rambam says you only change your status only when you verbalize it, we have a verbal confession. So how do we reconcile the Rambam with the Gemara? The Rambam is bound to the Gemara. The Gemara says differently than what the Rambam is saying. That's the question. This way, as we spoke, we have a number of shiur in the introduction of Hilchos Teshuva that forgiveness doesn't mean to say God says, I won't have a claim against you. Teshuva is a rehabilitative process. When one sins, the consequence of sin is we compromise our spirituality. When you do tshuva, you're rehabilitated, reinstated, and even advanced, spiritually speaking. So for the rehabilitative process to take place, it must do what the Rambam says. It's not enough just to feel the remorse or to think the remorse and mentally have the commitment to the future. You must verbalize it. Because the only way this process works, based on the verse in the Torah, it says you must confess. You must have verbal confession. So to be fully reinstated, it's not only being called the tzaddik, it's being fully recovering from that regression, from that compromise due to your past behavior. That's the Rambam. The Gemara is speaking this way. A person is a Rasha. Person says, I'm going to turn over, in his mind, I'm turning over a new leaf. So in terms of classification, he's a tzaddik. I'm marrying on the condition, my classification is tzaddik. He didn't say I'm rehabilitated. For rehabilitation, spiritual rehabilitation, you have to follow what the Rambam says. But in terms of changing classification, I will no longer behave that way ever again. If that's the case, you're a tzaddik. If you're sincere and you mean what you say, even though you don't verbalize it, you're reclassified. Are you still comatose, spiritually speaking, due to the past? The answer is yes. But who are you? Now I'm a tzaddik. He is a tzaddik because he's been reclassified. So we're talking about two different issues here. Spiritual rehabilitation, ki'ilu lo chot, as if you never sinned. That's the Rambam. That's what Torah speaks about the laws of atonement. As it says in the Pasuk, V'svatu es chatosam, you must confess your sin. That's verbal confession. The Gemara is not speaking about verbal, we're not talking about kapara, atonement. We're talking about classification. Since he said on the condition, I'm classified as a tzaddik, if he had stirrings of those stirrings and of sincerity in his heart, he has a new classification. If that's the case, he met the prerequisite to the marriage. If that's the case, she's married, but we don't know, because we don't know, did he have it, didn't he have it? Was he sincere in his heart, was he not sincere in his heart? Therefore, it's questionable whether she's married or not married for that reason. Someone record the answer. Good. Yeah.
Yeah. Why must we verbalize in order to do teshuva? Why must it be spoken and not,
why is it more sufficient?
Yes.
The Rambam says, what's the basis? Because the Torah says, "V'svatu es chatosam." They must confess their sin. That's the basis. What's ritual slaughter? Ritual slaughter is very specific. The Gemara says it's halacha m'shisina. It was ordained to Moshe Tzina exactly what ritual slaughter is. You just read the verse. It says you must slaughter. What slaughter? Do you slaughter from the back? Do you slaughter from the throat? And how much do you have to cut? What kind of knife do you use? So all the particulars of what ritual slaughter is, that was ordained to Moshe Tzina. If you don't follow those laws which were ordained to Moshe Tzina, transmitted to him, it's as if you never slaughtered that animal of that bird. And it's considered no different than you shot it or it died of natural causes. Why? Why must it be done that way? You know what the answer is? Only God knows. Because within the spiritual realm, for that to be considered to take on a certain status of kosher rather than non-kosher, it doesn't generate impurity due to being a carcass of an animal, you have to do it this way. The only way that your soul can be rehabilitated and you can regain what you originally lost and compensate for the sin that you have done, it's not enough just to think it or feel it. You have to verbalize those feelings through speech. Why? Know what the answer is? Only God knows. But we can speak by speech. Why was man endowed with speech? Speech is a direct derivative of the infusion of the soul in the human being. That's where the power of speech emanates from. As it says, when he blew through his nostrils the soul of life, he became a living species. So the Aramaic translation is, the Chofetz Chaim brings this multiple times, living species means a speaking species. Speech is essential to what? To one's spirituality. As we said, if you study Torah without verbalizing it, it doesn't have the same effect. Because the pasuk says, Chaim hi l'motzeim. The Torah brings life to the one who articulates it, who verbalizes it. It's not up just to meditate in Torah. You have to say the words. You study Talmud, you have to say the words. You reflect in mind, but the words have to be said. Because the power of speech is directly connected to what? To our spirituality. Because the pasuk says it brings life to those who verbalize it. Why? The same answer, only God knows. Because God says, through speech that actualizes and that crystallizes the spirituality which we engage in, which makes a difference to our souls, whether we advance or we stagnate. Same thing. Teshuva, to rehabilitate the soul, which is a spiritual process, it has to be done through the power of speech. There's a question, if a person is not a Shomer Shabbos, and he touches your wine, and it's not pasteurized, what we call it's not mavushal. The law is you're not permitted to drink that wine. Let's say a person commits himself, from now on, I will not violate Shabbos. But he doesn't regret the Shabbos, all that in the past that he violated. But today, fully committed to Shabbos, and he touches your wine. Your wine, you're permitted to drink the wine. Because he's no longer a Shabbos desecrator. But he still has all this baggage of the past. Because he hasn't cleaned up this act, because he didn't follow the process of repentance. One thing has to do with another. If you observe the Shabbos and you believe you're a testament to the world, that God's the creator of the world, that's all you have to do. You don't have to do more than that. To be reclassified. Are you forgiven for the wrong you did? The answer is no. Until you follow the prescription of Teshuva, which is remorse, commitment, plus verbalization. My difficulty is, the Rambam quotes the verse, you must have confession. But he says, you must confess Lefnei Okel Yisborach, before God, the Blessed One. How do you know that? That's what it's speaking about. It says, you must confess. Besfadus Chatosam. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Any questions, any comments?